Hi, friends. Happy Friday. I am coming to you live from a beautiful morning here in Vancouver. I don't know if you can read it all over my face, but I am so thrilled for today's session. We are going to be diving into house plants. I don't know if you can see it, but I'm wearing my favorite t-shirt today. This is a shout out to my friend Bridget for introducing me to this t-shirt a few years ago. It says introverted but willing to discuss plants. So I don't know if you can see it there, but I put my favorite t-shirt on because I'm so excited for the session that we're going to have today. My name is Kristen. I'm the National Educator here at Sage. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. So rather than what we've been doing for our previous sessions, so diving into product or ingredients, today we're going to go right back to basics. We're going to get into the foundationals and we're going to talk plants. So even though house plants are not typically the plants from which we derive essential oils or any of the ingredients we use in our products, I think it's still super important for us to sort of set the tone for a foundation of how plants play such a big part in our wellness. And today we'll talk about specifically plants in our homes. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on me and how I sort of, came to love houseplants or to grow into the experience I have now. Then I'm going to give you some of my personal rules for houseplant ownership and growth. We're going to talk tips. I'm going to show you some awesome beginner plants, so sort of conventional and unconventional plants that you can grow in your home and can really get you started on your plant journey. So I'm going to take you back to the beginning. So I grew up in a town in rural Manitoba, and I had always had, through my childhood, a large garden. We had beautiful flower beds, we grew trees, and we had a variety of houseplants in the home. So the truth is, I have had an admitted green thumb from a very young age. And I think even back then, I realized the importance of having plants within your space and just how greenery really changed everything around you. So I was always comfortable with, whether it was weeding or pulling vegetables from the garden or watering the houseplants on the weekend. And I saw this sort of transfer through my life as I grew. So when I first moved out on my own, I think I dabbled a little bit and I had a few plants in my space, but it wasn't until a little bit later on that I really started to grow my passion and my affinity for houseplant ownership and growth. And that brings me to where I am today. So I sit somewhere around 100-ish houseplants in my apartment. I know that sounds like a wild number, but it's not really hard to get there. And we're going to talk just sort of about the experience of that today. When I was thinking about putting this session together, I thought about gathering some resources in terms of scientific or research studies. And the truth is, I decided against that because it's not really where I derive joy when I think about plant ownership. So I want to give you a couple of resources you can Google if you're curious about. The first study that I really encourage everyone to read comes to us from NASA, and it's really irrefutable evidence produced around houseplants in the home and how this improves air quality. So again, super simple Google, just NASA and houseplants. And this is a really cool sort of scientific approach to understanding the health benefit of houseplant ownership. And then what I'm more interested in are some cool studies that have been conducted even from places like Harvard around productivity and mood boosting. So there's a really great article you can find online about a minimum of a 15% increase in productivity when exposed to greenery. So people sharing that when they think about what would make their workspace ideal, they think about things like a window or having exposure to plants. And then specifically mood boosting. So thinking about that idea of purpose and giving yourself something to focus on other than yourself. So there's a lot of great articles you can find around correlation between something similar to pet ownership and plant ownership. So the way that it really helps take you out of yourself, it gives you a focus on something else, something to take care of. I look back over these last couple months and some of the really tough times that we've had, and I think about the space in which I was taking care of my plants and just that idea of having something to commit to. So a watering schedule, whether it was sort of pruning or just like general maintenance, it was something in which I was able to have the experience of being outside of myself. So those are some things to consider. And then, like I said, we're going to talk about my personal rules for houseplant growth and ownership. I'm going to give you some hot tips, and then we're going to look at some plants themselves. So earlier this year, I wrote a blog on our .com. So Fanny's going to put that in the comment section if you want to reference later. But I'm going to talk a lot about that same information today, so you know that that exists there as a resource if you need. But the first hot tip that I'm going to share today, so this is my number one personal rule, it's about not spending a lot of money or buying really expensive plants, because I believe that Mother Nature would give those to you for free. And so there's a number of reasons I believe this idea of not spending a lot of money on plants. And the first one is really about accessibility. So my personal belief is that greenery and plants should be accessible to everyone. I don't think that cost should be a barrier or should be prohibitive in the idea of people wanting to learn or to expand, the collection they have within their home. The second piece is that it's really unnecessary. So houseplants really are sort of having a moment in the sun, no pun intended. There's a lot of whether it's like from blogs or social media accounts or things, there's really like a lot of exposure. And a lot of times what happens is this pushes up price points. But I'm here to tell you that there are so many options for purchasing plants at accessible price points that don't include breaking the bank. So I love to recommend, for us here in Canada, a home hardware store like Canadian Tire has an incredible garden section, incredible selection of plants. For our friends in the United States, Lowe's is a really great option for you to look at adding plants there. Any really of your local home hardware stores, even grocery stores, neighborhood bodegas. I know when I used to live in Toronto, so again here for our friends in Canada, I had so many incredible experiences with purchasing plants from just sort of local neighborhood stores, whether it was fruit and veggie markets or again grocery stores. The other great option you have is propagation and then sharing plants with your friends. So that's one of my personal favorite ways. And what that means is just taking small cuttings or clippings or different trails from your plants and then helping to grow new, smaller plants that you can do for yourself within your home or your friends. So when I think about when I had mentioned my 100 plants, it's not that I've purchased 100 plants necessarily, it's that I've propagated and clipped and grown little plants from the ones that I already had as the mother or the parent plant. So something to think about. And then really the main reason why I always shy away or encourage people from spending a lot of money on houseplants is that it really sets you up for disappointment. It's the nature of nature, my friends. It doesn't matter how good of a parent we are to our plants and how well we take care of them, something can and will go wrong. So, and what I really mean by that is maybe you catch a bug, or maybe you had a plant too close to a heater and you didn't realize and you had a little bit of singe to your leaves. And I just think that if we're really stressing ourselves over every yellow leaf or every wilted flower, it's going to cause stress, which is the exact opposite intention of houseplant ownership. So in saying that, I just encourage you to explore all the accessible and inexpensive ways that you can bring greenery into your home. And I'd be happy again to provide suggestions by region if you want to reach out in the comment section. So number 2, personal rules coming from Kristen and my collection is to have as many of the same plant as you want. I feel like sometimes people say, even to me personally, like, well, you already have that plant. Like, do you need another one? But the truth is, I like that plant. And if I enjoy that plant and I have success with that plant, so if that means I can take care of that plant, it thrives in my home, I don't see the harm in having more than one. I think about like an analogy, like you don't only have one shirt. Like if you have a t-shirt you really like, for example, you can have another t-shirt or you can have another pair of shoes. And so even if you look sort of in my collection behind me here, you'll see, for example, I have a number of snake plants, and I'm going to talk about the snake plant later. And the truth is, I do love the snake plant. I love how they look. I love the texture of the leaves. There are a ton of different variegations. And what variegation means in plants is really that it means they exhibit different colors. So the leaves can have like different patterns or stripes or sort of like blots and just different ways that the leaves and the colors show up. And so I find that, for example, snake plants, to me, they're not all the same. I think you can grow them different according to light conditions and watering and whatnot. And so I just encourage you to not be discouraged by the idea of thinking that you have to try something new if you already know what you like. And then number 3, and this is where we're going to spend the majority of our time today. This is the most important, my friends. So if you take anything from today's session, I really urge you to pay attention to some of the tips shared here, is to own and grow houseplants for the conditions that you have, not the conditions that you wish you had. And so this is going to be related specifically to light, and then watering will come in here as well. So a really great place to start would be something like tropicals. So just to sort of paint this picture for you, many tropical plants grow in regions in the world in which they experience like sometimes 8 to 10 plus hours of direct sunlight per day. So that's the environment in which they've acclimated. That's how they thrive. So you think about bringing them into an environment where you have low light or no light, something of that nature, and they're simply not going to thrive. And this is the easiest way as a plant parent to set yourself up for heartache. So I really encourage you, like I mentioned, to think about the conditions you have. I want to share a personal story and just sort of again how I've overcome that situation with my plants. So when I moved to Vancouver from Toronto, this was the fall of 2018, I was moving from an apartment in which I was on a southwest corner. So experienced plant parents would know southwest is ideal light for plants. So everything I had in my apartment was thriving. I had no issues at all with growth, with light conditions, but I also had plants that were curated specifically to those light conditions. So when I then moved to Vancouver, I got this wonderful and beautiful apartment that I'm grateful for, and I'm situated on a northeast corner. So the exact opposite conditions of the light that I'd had previously. And I also moved in November. So for those of you who are familiar with, sort of Canadian weather patterns, we're moving into the winter at that point, shorter daylight exposure, a lot more rain and gray and rainy days. And immediately I saw this with my plants. So they'd had a number of factors to which they'd already been exposed. So number one, I had moved a lot of them across the country, which is shocking to a plant and can cause a little bit of stress until it reacclimates. And then they had this different experience of light that for many of them, we weren't able to overcome. And the truth is I did have to rehome and gift some of my plants to friends who had more ideal conditions. And then the stubborn part of me sort of fought for some of those plants that I unfortunately lost the battle. So over that winter, I did really learn a lot about the idea of truly paying attention to what your plant tells you it needs. So if a plant says that it needs bright, direct sunlight or long-term exposure, I really encourage you to believe that plant and to consider before you bring it into your home if it is the right plant for you. The other side of that is plants that require low light. And this is, again, a really important distinction I want to make here is that low light does not mean no light. This doesn't mean you can take a plant and stick it in a dark corner and leave it and not water it. It's not going to thrive in that way. And what my experience tells me is that a lot of low light plants will survive and will actually remain hardy, but the truth is when exposed to a more medium, so a sort of bright indirect light, they'll actually begin to thrive. And if you do, again, just some basic Googling or some research, you'll find that to be the case. There are very few indoor house plants that truly, truly require a low light situation. It's just that they can adapt and grow if that's the only condition that you can offer. So that's my best advice when it comes to light is to really consider the conditions you have and then choose your plants accordingly. Because something else that can happen is if you do have, for example, the southwest facing light that I mentioned, and you start to introduce plants that typically do enjoy low to medium light, they'll burn. So you'll get some burning or singeing in your leaves, you'll get wilting of the plant because again, it's not their ideal circumstance. So it's interesting to think that, of course, I think we would always think that the brighter the light, the better, but of course it isn't the case for certain plants. So I encourage you to just learn the conditions you have in your space. And then again, really quick Google search will help point you in the direction of certain plants you can find. And then when you go to purchase plants, they have like that little plastic insert that gives you some information about watering and light, and you can get great information from there. So again, if you see like the big bright sun icon and you know you're intending to put this in sort of a north corner window, it might not be your best option. So think about those things when you're thinking about light. And then the other side, a little bit simpler, but still has definitely some complications, is about watering. So irrefutably, undeniably, the number one cause of plant perishing within our homes, it's overwatering. So I like to refer to it as overloving. It's that we're caring so much for our plants and we want to take care of them. But the truth is overwatering causes a lot of issues for us. So think about a plant, for example, in nature. And I know that house plants have been cultivated and acclimated like to a more domestic lifestyle, but just let's use the idea of nature. Plants are taking anything that nature throws at it. So maybe you're in a period of drought and you haven't seen rain in weeks. Maybe you're in a torrential downpour and there's even hail, there's wind sort of whipping leaves across the plant, and you sort of see them thrive. It's in their nature. It's in their nature to be resilient, to be hardy. But when you do take something and you domesticate it, you get a little bit more of a specific situation, and we do end up with some plants that are super picky, super finicky, and those are ones that, again, you'd have to decide if you had the conditions that made sense. So when it comes to water, I would always say to err on the side of slight underwatering versus over. But of course, you want to be as close to ideal as possible. And again, Google. I know I've said this so many times, but Google is your friend here. It's like there are so many people writing incredible blogs or articles, just hosting content that gives you like perfect information to learn about plants. So you'll read things like, stick your finger into the soil and, if it's dry after an inch, your plant needs water then, or let the top soil dry before you rewater. And again, just pay attention to those types of tips. And my experience is that once you learn what your plant enjoys, this becomes easy. It's not complicated or something that you have to, check in with continually. And something I had mentioned when I wrote the blog, and I'll just share it with you here, is to really simplify for yourself the idea of water. So I like to paint this picture, sort of create an analogy about like children versus adults. It's like children would need a lower volume of food literally based on the size of their body versus an adult. So think about it the same way with your plants. You wouldn't water a succulent the same way you would water a palm tree. You would water, in correlation with the size of the plant. Another great tip about watering is to think about light. So if you correlate light and water, a plant that is typically receiving or requiring lower light typically also receives and requires less water. It's not using the resources in the same way as a plant that's exposed to really bright or direct sunlight, so you can typically hold back a little bit of water there. And then the last, I think, really important thing to mention about watering is to adjust seasonally. And again, I cannot stress how important this is to your plant maintenance and health. And so think about the seasons like spring and summer in which we have longer exposure to light. So right now we're seeing the sun rise before 6 a.m. We're seeing the sky still not even being totally pitch black by after 9 o'clock. So there's a long exposure over the course of the day for our plants. And so that is why in the spring and summer, you want to start watering your plants at a more frequent rate. This is typically when most houseplants start to thrive and they really start to come to life. And so they require a little bit more to support that new growth. And then conversely, most plants have their dormant season through fall and winter, and the growth really slows exponentially. I know a mistake that I have made is not pivoting quickly enough. So staying a little bit too late into the fall on my summer watering schedule, and then starting to see some of the things I mentioned. So whether it's wilting or yellowing, I know I've lost many a cactus. I recall the last time I saw one of my cactuses just looking a little bit off, and I kind of gave it a gentle squeeze and it just mushed in my hand and then just fell right over, and I knew I had fallen victim to the water trap. So that's something I really encourage you to think about as well. Just a general rule of thumb, but you'll have to see how this applies to you and your plants specifically. I keep my plants on a once a week watering schedule in the summer. And some of my larger plants or plants that I know require more water, I will water them twice a week. And then when I move to fall and winter, I'm more of a 10 to 14 day for my small and medium plants. And I keep my big guys on a weekly schedule, but again, just sort of maintaining and using a bit less water. So I don't want you to get caught up in the details or the complications. Like, you don't need a super specific amount of water. You'll learn how your plants are acclimating. You'll learn to see like how they're absorbing. You never want to see them sitting with water or water sort of pooling at the top, but you'll get an idea of how that goes, and then you know what I mean. Again, you're not going to have to keep researching this. You'll just have a bit of a general feeling for how that looks with your plants. So those are my personal 3 like hard and fast rules. And then I want to talk about a few sort of tips and how some of them relate. So the first is that most plants do not like to be moved. And I want to talk about this guy right behind me. So I'm breaking my own rule for this video, but I really wanted to share this plant with you. So this is a fiddle leaf fig, one of the most sought after and like incredibly beautiful plants to have in the home. This plant is having a moment in the sun. You've seen the fiddle rise in popularity in the last few years. And the truth is, This is one of the most finicky plants on the market. I cannot tell you how tricky these guys are. But again, in true Kristen fashion, I was determined. If I'm being honest, I probably don't have the right light for this plant in my home. We've seen some success this year, but I'm not going to lie and say I'm not a bit nervous as we head back towards the fall, because this is a plant that requires a lot of light. So I have it currently sitting in an east-facing window, so very close to the window for the max amount of light it can have. It has a couple hours in the morning of bright direct sunlight and then bright indirect throughout the day, but these guys don't like to be moved. What I mean by that is they want to find a space in your home, and that's where they want to acclimate. So even plants that you're not moving, you want to rotate them. So once every week or 2 weeks, you can rotate the plant so that they're never growing towards the light source. And what that means is you'll see leaning. You see plants, they're truly growing towards the sun. So if you give them just a regular rotation, it will keep the leaves as well from any type of like burn or singe, and it'll keep the plant situated more evenly. But as much as you can avoid it, don't move them. And that means like not trying like this space on your desk and then this window here. As much as you can avoid it, let's just keep them in one place. So that's tip number one. Number two is in relation to watering. So the same way we are adjusting our water, we would adjust our fertilizer. So I'm not going to lie, I'm not big on fertilizing. I don't understand, I think, enough of the science, and sometimes I've tried and then I know I've just used too much. But if you are more experienced than I am and you're using fertilizer regularly, it also needs to be adjusted. That was something that I learned, is that there are a variety of fertilizers available. They're specific to certain plants and soil types. So again, there's a lot of like conditions here that you need to meet, but you do want to adjust in terms of the amount and the regularity, again, by season. So something to consider. Another tip I have about watering, and this is just personal preference, but I have found it to be successful, is to water the same day each week. And that's not a hard and fast rule, because when you think about what I'd mentioned earlier about nature and just sort of like taking what Mother Nature throws at those plants, the reason I really enjoy doing this personally is that it keeps a rhythm. And because domesticated houseplants do have a little bit more of a sense of like regularity, like they know the conditions they're receiving. So they're not experiencing that idea of like precipitation or wind in the same way. And so I have a girlfriend, for example, and she says, oh, I just sort of give them a little bit of a drink when they look like they need it. And that's not my favorite advice, just in the sense that that can cause some like shock and stress to your plant as well. If it's sort of wilting and then coming back to life, or it starts to have the experience that it doesn't know when it's going to receive water, you can find some stress in the plant there as well. And that can cause like yellowing and things like that. So if it makes sense for you, it used to be Sundays. Somehow I moved on to Mondays. I don't know, but I'm sort of within those 2 days. So either Sunday or Monday, I roll up my sleeves, I get ready. Like I said, it's a big project over here because of the number of plants, but it seems to be what keeps my plants the happiest. Tip number 4, and this is actually going to be about one of the products that we have at Sage, is using a diffuser to add moisture or humidity to your plants. So I have 2 of the diffusers in my space. I have an open concept apartment, and I have them situated to help add moisture and humidity to my orchids as well as my cactuses. So I still have the experience of using the diffuser for my benefit, so to help breathe refreshed air, to help create a sensory experience that I want in my home, but then I'm also providing light moisture and humidity to some of my plants that are a bit more finicky. So again, when I think about cactuses, not perfect the conditions that I have, but I have them along an east windowsill. So they're all receiving bright, indirect light for the entire day, and that really important direct sun in the morning. And here we are a year and a half later, and they're all doing really well. So I think I would attribute that to the diffuser in large part, because cactuses need such a small amount of water. When you think about these as desert plants, they're not being exposed to precipitation often. And so again, that's a big mistake that we often make. And so if you can think about adding a diffuser for humidity, you're laughing, you're cooking with gas. Number 5, this is the final tip that I'm gonna give, and then I'm gonna show you some plants. Let's be real, I'm just excited to show you guys some of my plants. So the last one is about removing any sort of dead or dying foliage, whether it's leaves or flowers, so that your plant isn't diverting resources. And what I mean by that is, like, think of in your own body, for example, say you have a big hearty meal. all of the energy in your body starts to redirect towards your stomach. So your body is working to digest and to process the food you've consumed. And so everything sort of moves to that area. It's the same way with plants. So if there's an injured leaf or, like I said, a dying or a wilted piece, it starts to divert its energy and resources there, and it can take away from the health of the rest of your plant. So on that note, I want to show you, I actually saved a plant here that I want to show you what I would mean by that. So this is the plant here. And this one is called an anthurium. So I'm just going to give you an example there. So this is a plant that I actually inherited earlier this year. Wasn't in the best condition, and I personally actually didn't have experience with this plant. So I decided that I was going to learn the best I could and see where we landed. So what you would know about an anthurium is these are beautiful plants that typically have these nice waxy flowers. You might see them more as red is a really typical color, or yellow, but mine came with these really glossy green. So I've had this for about the last 3 months, and the flowers were doing incredibly. And then I started to notice just in the last week, I'll see if I can just aim this at you guys here. So this leaf here, so this is one of the flowers, and it has gone now to like a really deep sort of speckled brown. Like, it is clear that it is not healthy anymore. And so I started to get nervous, and I thought, like, what have I been doing wrong? I thought I'd really been following these instructions well. And then I looked into it more deeply, and I learned that this is actually the natural order of this plant, is that it produces these beautiful blossoms that last about 3 to 6 months, and then they wilt and they die and they need to be removed. And that was something cool that I learned as well, is that the stalk on which the flower grows will never produce another flower. So the right thing to do here is actually going to be to remove that entire stalk. So that's what I'm going to do later today. You just take a sterilized, really sharp knife or clean scissors, and I'm just going to remove that entire piece. And what I've read online is that it actually encourages new flowers to come back quite quickly. So that was something interesting, again, in the sense, sorry, just going to put that down, in the sense that I could easily have been discouraged and thought, that I was doing something wrong. But by just doing some quick research, I realized that that's the way this plant grows, and that's part of its natural process. And then I'm just going to be looking forward to a new flower coming. So that was tip number 5. So thank you for sitting through all of that. Maybe you're just like me and you're drooling and waiting to actually see some plants. So that's what we're going to jump into. I want to share some awesome plants that you can own and grow in your home that are really beginner, super easy to take care of. Some are really conventional, and then some are a little bit, I don't know, I think they're cooler. So I'm going to show you those today and then let you know where I got them as well, so you can track some down. So we'll start with the snakes behind me. So I'm not going to pull any of them off the display there, but a snake plant is sometimes called a mother-in-law's tongue. It's in the Sansevieria family, and these are across the board renowned as the easiest houseplants to own. Some people say they're indestructible, they can't be killed. That isn't true, but it's going to be tough to do it. So they're very hardy, very resilient plants. They grow in low light, they require very low water, they're actually drought tolerant, but they're beautiful. So they have these long, really tough, beautiful leaves. They come in different variegations. I personally am just quite drawn towards the dark green. I really like a little bit of that speckled, but you can get them in yellow, almost more of like a stripe. So again, a lot of different ones that you can explore. But these are plants that are a great example of a plant that will grow and be hardy in a lower light, but they'll thrive when you put them in a higher light space. So they do not want direct sun, but they're great in a medium, bright, or indirect. And if you even sort of look at the different sizes of leaves within my plants, I would know that those have grown in different areas in my home in which they had different exposure to light. So some of the really tall leaves I've had, they had the opportunity to have sort of a best sort of corner. And some of the shorter leaves have just been in a space in which, for example, I have 2 that sit on a bookshelf. So there's still an exposure between 8 to 10 feet from a window, but they're not getting the same kind of light. Snake plants are also incredibly inexpensive. You can look at anywhere from like $3 to $10 for a small to medium plant. And then these plants actually really like to grow according to the pot size. So like this one I have, I don't know if you can see it here in the corner, that's the largest snake I have. It started from a plant that only had about 3 or 4 leaves. And just as it grew, I continued to move its pot size, and it will become like pot bound in the sense that it will just grow to the conditions that it has. So I love snakes. I'm a big fan. This goes back to my number 2 about having as many of the same plant as you want. So that's the snake. Next, I want to talk about this guy. So this is another really common, really well-known plant. This is called a pothos. This variety or variegation is called a queen marble. So you see, like, just I'll put some of those leaves up close to you. It has that really beautiful pattern of like a green and white sort of split. And how you keep these leaves looking really healthy like this, sorry, I'm really in the jungle here, so I gotta navigate, is exposure to light. So these are, again, plants that can grow in lower light conditions. They're really not picky, but again, they thrive in a bit of a higher light situation. So this one I have really perfectly situated, again, within 8 to 10 windows from an east-facing window. So it gets that direct morning, it gets bright light all day, and these are beautiful trailing options. So if you want a plant that gives you instant gratification, immediate satisfaction, pothos are the way to go. They're very bushy, so they grow like really large and beautiful. The trails hang so wonderfully. They can be trained, so if you want to put them along hooks or anything along a wall, pothos is a really incredible beginner plant. But even for intermediate and advanced, it's my personal favorite plant. I look around, I'm sort of looking past the camera on the other side, and I have a number of pothos plants. And these are, again, plants available in many variegations. There's a beautiful neon, which is a bit of like a neon green color. This one's a bit more sensitive to light. It can't be in that really bright light. It's a little bit of a slower grower. A golden pothos is a really common pothos. So this is a bit of like a green and yellow leaf. So again, that variegated. And those are, like, I think the most common you would find. There's a beautiful variegation called a jade and pearls, if you want to just Google that. And it's, again, like a bit of a green and white marbling, but almost more like blotchy than the one you're seeing. Mine's a bit stripy. So a pothos is a plant I just really, really encourage you to explore for super easy houseplant growing. And again, for watering, it's a really standard, like about once a week or every 10 days. This is a plant that is resilient in the sense that if it starts to get a little droopy or wilting, you can add a bit more water and it just perks back up to life. So there's definitely a reason that people love the pothos. The next plant I want to show you is commonly called the rubber plant. This one, it's called, its proper name is a Ficus elastica. So this is the guy here. And this one is actually a ruby variant. So I don't know how closely you can see it on some of the leaves, but it has just a little bit of a speckling of sort of like a pink or a ruby red. This plant is actually new to me. I've only had it for the last few months because I didn't think that I had ideal conditions for a rubber plant. I think these need sometimes a little bit of a different light than I have, more particularly the darker leaves. So this guy, again, has that beautiful variegation, like just a really sort of firm leaf as well. So there's not a lot of give. I've had some great little leaves pop up. This one right here is actually brand new. It just unfurled this morning, so I kind of had a laugh about that. And then I have another one coming to life here. What's really sweet about these is the new leaves grow in a bit of a casing, and then the casing just sort of peels away. So that's actually literally, that was the case coming out from the leaf that came this morning. So these are really easy to take care of as well if you have the right light conditions. They only need to be watered. That one down there. They need to be watered, again, about once a week. And this one does like a little bit more light. So I have found that I keep it, again, in my main east facing window. So it's getting a direct sunlight for a few hours, then that bright indirect all day. I do keep it a little bit sheltered behind a couple other plants I have because it doesn't want that full blown bright sun, but it wants like the indirect for the day. So I keep it sort of sheltered behind a few other leaves, and then I find that it's really thriving. These plants are great as well for growing quite tall and quite bushy. A lot of people love them beside like their couch or their, like somewhere in their living room. They're a great, really focal or centerpiece. I think this variegation's a little bit lesser known. You'll see like a really deep, almost like rubied type of leaf is really common, as well as like a really dark forest green. Again, inexpensive plants. This one here cost me $9.99, and you can find them, again, from like a really small size to a larger size, anywhere still under $30. And I should mention that about the pothos as well. One of the most inexpensive plants you can find. And this is one I would absolutely tell you, do not ever pay expensive price for a pothos. They're the easiest plants to propagate. So you can start yourself from anywhere, 3 or 4 little leaves on a trail. You can have, a whole home full of pothos in just a few months for a plant you could have purchased for under $10. So that was the pothos, that's the rubber. what are we going to talk about next? We got a couple more. So these two plants I'm going to show you are part of the family called Syngonium. So this is them here. So this is more of just the green variety. So you see it has, again, a light variegation sort of between a light and a medium green. And then this is the pink version. So I'm going to really get that close so you can see it. And so there's a couple reasons I love these plants. These are tropicals, but they actually really break the rules when it comes to tropicals because they don't want a lot of light. It actually says right here, I kept the little card, and it says a naturally bushy plant will eventually start climbing if you'd like. And then what it wants actually is a shaded location with indirect sunlight. So I have these actually positioned like sort of against a wall because I'm going to try and trail mine up the wall. And it would be in line with that east facing window, but receives none of the direct light. So it's almost in the shadow to the side. So the vicinity of the plant is bright, but it's been in that shaded side. And these plants are thriving for me. So again, if you're looking for that instant gratification, these are plants that are growing quickly. I have, if you can see, just tucked in the back, like a brand new leaf unfurling there. And there's actually one deep in the middle here as well. And I think I've had 2 or 3 this week. So these are plants I only got within the last 3 months as well. Again, I wasn't sure that I had the right light until I learned that they actually loved shade. I'll show you just something else here with the pink variety. So again, you see I have 2 new leaves ready to come in here. And what's neat about these ones is that the pink color actually just remains while the leaf is young. So as the leaf matures, you see the pink start to fade a little bit more to green. So it just takes on more of like almost a camouflage look. But when they first come out as a brand new leaf, they're really bright. So this is beautiful. If you just love something that's like delicate, a little bit romantic, I think about this plant, these are great on like a desk or a bedside table, again, somewhere where you have a bit of exposure to light, but it doesn't have to be like, you know, as much, like I said, as something typically for a tropical. So the Syngoniums, there's so many different varieties. Again, very cheap. Both of these plants were $4.99, and I got them at a home hardware store in Surrey, in British Columbia. The last 2 plants that I want to show you are 2 of my absolute favorites. These are a little bit off the beaten path, less conventional, but super easy to grow. And like I said, just sort of showcases a variety. So this one here is called the African mask plant. So this is what it looks like, and I have 2. I actually have 3, but I only have 2 hands, so I can only show you 2 at a time. And this is a plant that I had mentioned is like when you think about something less conventional, maybe you don't see this all the time. A plant that I was just drawn to the second I saw it. I thought it was so beautiful and so unique. My first thought was like, do I have the conditions to take care of this plant? And it turns out I do. It actually requires light, very similar to the Syngoniums. So it wants something bright and indirect, but it doesn't need direct full sunlight. The thing for this plant is it actually requires more water than I thought for a plant that's a little bit lower light. So I want to show you, I'll show you on this one. Actually, it'll make better sense. So if you look at this leaf here, you see there's a little bit of like yellow within here. And so when I first got the plant, I think I was being too careful with water. And so I was actually underwatering this plant. And then I saw those yellow spots appearing on the leaves. So again, did a quick Google search, did some research, and realized I was actually being too, like, you know, I just wasn't watering enough. I was being too careful. And so I started to give it a little bit more of a saturated drink every week. And then you started to see leaves like this. And I just like to show you this for context. Like, look how large this leaf is. And these are beautiful leaves. When they unfurl, I can't even tell you the beauty of this plant. And I'm going to shout out to my friend Steph, who I know is watching, because she has a brand new leaf on her African mask just about to unfurl. And we were sort of talking about it the other day. And so these are plants as well. In my experience, they're producing leaves at a really quick rate. So this one, you see how many more leaves there are. And this one's getting, I think, just a little bit better light. So you can see even just within those types of situations that even plants that are placed close to each other, just that small amount of light exposure will make that much more difference. So something to consider. These are also plants that I've been told are great to pot together. And so I thought about that because I do have 3. I thought about getting a larger pot and just sort of planting them together because I think in that case you'll encourage the larger leaves to grow. So I might give that a try a little bit later this summer. And so these ones, like I mentioned, they want a good thorough soak just once a week. They want to be in an east-facing window would be ideal, bright and indirect. Get yourself some large leaves like this. And I will say as well, these plants were each $3.99 at Canadian Tire. So I really meant it when I was telling you about not spending a lot of money on your plants. And then the last one I want to show you, I think I might have saved the best for last. This is a crazy looking plant, but I love it. So it's this one here. Literally, I lovingly call it the alien. This plant is called Euphorbia lactea. So it's a type of cactus in the Euphorbia family. Like I said, we just call it an alien in my home. So I'm going to put it just nice up close there so you can see. I'm going to show you how it's nice and winding and twisty at the top. So these plants are just cool. I think this is not something you see all the time. They're really unique. They're really a statement piece. And again, there's a lot of cool things about the way they grow. So as they grow, it's actually not uncommon for them to continue to furl and to sort of like experience this winding. And then if you can see, I'll try and get so close there, but what happens is along the top, they'll actually produce little flowers. So I've had it happen once before where I got flowers all along the top, and they're just like beautiful white little buds. But otherwise, I just love it as a decorative piece. So this is a full-blown cactus. These guys require almost no water. They want as much light as humanly possible. So I keep it in my east facing and just cross my fingers and hope for the best. And so far things have been swell. But I really cannot stress enough how little water this plant requires. So I got this plant at IKEA, and this one was $12. That's actually a high end of a price point that I would normally pay for a plant. And I say that, and I just keep saying that in jest because I want to really illustrate for you guys the idea that you don't have to break the bank to have incredible statement pieces in your home. I could tell you quite honestly, this entire selection of plants behind me, including this fiddle leaf fig, I got this plant for under $20. So sometimes I see people sharing, $200, $300 for a fiddle. And I know for myself personally, it's not an investment I could make because I would be too afraid of what would happen, and I would feel stressed, and that's not how I want to experience plant ownership. So lastly, before we go today, what I want to share with you is that it's not all fun and games over here. So I'm making it look as though, every plant I have is thriving and everything's doing well. And I really want to humble myself. I want to show you what's going on sort of behind the scenes. So this, I cut off my plant today. I'm so sad, but have a look. So this is one of my pothos plants. This plant is experiencing root rot. So I am heartbroken about this. This is one of the oldest plants that I have. This is a plant that I painstakingly grew by hand. I propagated trail by trail and replanted into the pot until I had a beautiful thriving plant. But really what happened here was that I didn't pivot. So again, when I think about what I explained to you earlier, the growing conditions that I had in Toronto versus in Vancouver, what I didn't realize is that I wasn't adjusting the way I should have. So this plant went from entirely different light conditions, to a totally new space, and I just continued to water it the same way. I actually had placed it up high on a bookshelf, and so what I realized is that I had inadvertently not been paying attention to the soil, so I hadn't been testing sort of with my finger as much to see, and then when I saw it happening, I was like, oh no, and I tried to repot it, and I tried to remove some of the mushy roots, and unfortunately this is a plant I'm gonna lose. I'm not gonna lie, this one hits hard, my friends. Like looking at these leaves, this one hits hard. But I know that, like I said, this was an easy mistake to make. And again, when I think about that idea about propagating and purchasing inexpensive plants, this is a space in which I'm willing to sort of dive back in, and I don't have like that deep regret after having spent a lot of money. The second one I'll show you the other side of the spectrum. So that was overwatering. This is underwatering. So have a look at this one. You see these leaves. This is called a bird's nest fern. And this, sort of almost ironically, I kind of like how the plant looks. It's this really nice sort of rusty brown. But what happened here is that I had this plant previously in a location that it was receiving less light. And so in that case, I was watering it less. But I realized it was a little bit too less of light, not enough light. And so I moved it to another area in my home in which it started to receive a plethora of light. It was, it was really enjoying the light, but I didn't adjust my water. Again, I was still staying with that smaller amount. And this happened quickly. I want to say as well, this wasn't like a slow progression. It just sort of in the last week or so, I saw this happening. And again, I just kept this plant in this condition for a teachable moment. I knew we were going to have this session, and so I wanted to show it to you. And so later today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove any of the leaves that are truly crispy and brown. And I'm going to try my very best. I think I'm going to be able to save this plant because inside, if you can see here, I have at least 3 new leaves coming in. And so I think that, we're going to lose some of the larger and the more senior leaves on the plant, but it's going to give it the best chance of recovering. So that's why I just wanted to share those 2 things with you. So like I said, it doesn't look like it's all sunshine and rainbows. It's like I'm having my own learning curves with plants as well. But the truth is that I love the experience and I wouldn't trade it for the world. So that's going to be the end of the session for today. That's everything I wanted to share. I want to just take a moment to encourage anyone out there who thinks like, oh, I'm not good at growing plants, or I don't think I'd be able to do that you absolutely can. You don't have to endeavor to be a person that has 100 plants necessarily, but the joy that you can have by having like a beautiful piece of greenery in your home, something to take care of, something like a nice statement piece, or however you derive joy, you absolutely can be a person who takes care of a houseplant. I promise you, I could even give you plants that you grow in a basement apartment. So if that's, any of those sort of things, again, thinking about your conditions, if that's sort of what's holding you back, there's always something that we could find to support your wellness in that way. So I'm really excited afterwards. I know I've seen through the session some comments popping up. I'm excited to jump in and share as much as I can. I always feel it's important to say I'm not an expert. I'm just a true plant lover. I'm an aficionado. I've really sort of thrown myself into the hobby for the last, large number of years, but I'm always learning and I'm always open to feedback and just sort of hearing tips and tricks from other fellow plant lovers in the way that they're finding success in their growing. So thank you again for spending your time today. Hopping back into content that you'll see on this Facebook Live over the next few weeks. So we're going to move a little bit more towards our products and ingredients, but not even for a few weeks. So next week, Trevor is going to take us through on Friday, which is July 31st, a tour of his garden. And he's going to talk about some raw plant material and more of the herbs and plants that you would see used in essential oils and in some of our products. So that's going to be a don't miss session. Please tune in to that. And then the following Friday, August 7th, I will be back and talking about some of the new products we're adding to our collection at Saje and how those products can support your wellness, both together and separately. So that's what we have on the docket the next few weeks. Again, I want to thank you for spending your time. I hope you learned something today or at least inspired yourself to think about the ways that you can include plants in your personal wellness and how this can create an experience for you in your home that brings you as much joy as it brings me. Have a really great weekend, everyone. Get outside, maybe get a new appreciation for some of the beautiful plants and trees and things that you'll see in nature, and we will see you again soon. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.